your names, but Christina and the rest of the staff team is here. You can see Gretchen, Nick, Nathan, Lori, Keely, Cheryl, we're all on here. Glad to be with you. And you'll see soon in the chat box, we'll just put some rules and protocols. Those of you who were with us all last week at Gen Square, this is nothing new, but for those who don't know how we run things, it's just some basics around the Zoom. We'll also put in chat a link for an evaluation. Again, that may be familiar to you if you've come to our stuff. So if it's just you want to do it live while it's going on, some people found that easier. So we'll put it here now. And then at the end, you'll see the chat. And then as well, Discord's still going on. For those of you who were with us last week with Gen Squared and you have access to Discord, this conversation, as it was originally scheduled will be open and can visit there afterwards to continue the conversation. I'm going to introduce our speaker briefly. She would have a much longer bio, but we don't have all the time for that. So I'm going to focus primarily on her education, which I think is very central to the information that you'll hear, and then a little bit about her research. So Smiranda, which we're really excited is with us today, has a PhD in psychology and brain sciences, which focuses on cultural and positive psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, which she is zooming to us from today, also where she lives now. So she, before that, did 3 master's degrees, and those are in international affairs and international development from UPenn and Wharton School of Business, and psychology from UCSB, and then an MA in education, UCSB from the Graduate School of Education. And then before that was at Yale doing a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Economics. Currently, she's a lecturer and researcher at University of California in Santa Barbara, as well as a professor at Westmont College. Importantly, her research focuses on the impact of both national cultures and socio-economic cultures on a broad range of well-being outcomes. She works with a variety of schools, local, national, and international organizations to actually implement positive psychology, and schools to help with worldwide anxiety and the depression epidemic amongst young people. Smiranda, thanks so much for sharing. Looking forward to learning a lot from you. I know it was hard for you even to pack it in this amount of time, so we're ready to listen. And folks can, we'll do a Q&A towards the end. So take
Thank you for that introduction, Christina. I always think overeducated and underpaid is sort of my approach to life. But I do like what I do, so that it's all good. I'm going to share my screen and then I will get started because I'm a little bit ambitious about what I want to cover today. So here we go. I have a slideshow. All right, so let me just move my screen around a little bit. Right now I can see everyone's faces, so I want to make sure I can see my slides too. All right. So I wanted to first say a thank you and a little bit about my background and my sort of relationship with the East-West Center. So I did the Asia Pacific Leadership Program. I was a member of the G11 cohort. This is, I think, our very first day of APLP. That's me right here. So I can't believe how long ago this has been. Yeah, I was newly married and I didn't have my 2 kids yet, and it just feels like a complete lifetime ago. But I do want to say that, you know, to this day, even though it's been so long, it's been really one of the best experiences of my life. I can't say enough good things about my time at the East-West Center and with the APLP crew and the friends I met and the mentors I met. And since then, I've gotten to go to a few weddings all over the place, and I've gotten to meet some newborn babies, and like it's just been an amazing experience. And still, I think some of the most like influential few months of my life. And actually, a lot of what I do now and a lot of what I'll be talking about today came out of my few months in Hawaii when I was doing all that sort of soul searching and reflective writing and trying to figure out what to do with my life. This is kind of what I put down on paper, and I'm doing it now, and it's really fun. I love what I do. So anyhow, it's so great to be back, and I've gotten to watch some of the other talks last week, and just so wonderful. I still get so inspired by hearing all these different voices and people trying to change the world in small and big ways. So really such a treat to both get to listen to those and to be a part of it and get to present some of the stuff that gets me really excited. So thank you to Christina and the rest of the leadership team. I just love the idea of this whole kind of generative space that you guys have created. So like I said, I have a lot that I want to cover today. So I might go a little bit over time. I think I told Christina that I was going to be talking for about 45 minutes and then leave about 45 minutes for questions. I may go over that, but feel free to kind of shut me up or hurry me along. I think, you know, I have here an agenda for today, but I could literally spend 6 months talking about each of these subtopics. So it's a little bit of a tasting menu, but hopefully it's enough to at least give you guys an idea of what positive psychology is and how maybe you can use it in your own life or in your own organizations. And I'm definitely available. I love reaching out to people, connecting with people about this stuff. So Christina or somebody will share my contact info, but if any of this stuff is interesting or you want to continue talking, like feel free to reach out to me and I can blab on this about this stuff for days and days and days. So I will start off with, it's a talk about positive psychology, and I know that there's a lot of sort of misconceptions and different ideas out there about what that means exactly. So I'm going to start just really broadly defining like, what is positive psychology? Then I'm going to go just a tiny bit into this idea that change is possible, that we can make changes in our life, make changes on even the brain level. So I'll get a little bit into something called neuroplasticity. Then I will give you guys an actual positive psychology practice or an intervention. We'll take a few minutes to do one of these interventions ourselves together. It's really brief, but really mighty. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And then because this is the East-West Center and because you guys are all interested in sort of making an impact on your communities, I will kind of end the presentation talking about some applied examples. So how does positive psychology come into play in schools, organizations, and more broadly in communities? So again, you know, feel free, I will take questions at the end. You can reach out to me at the end. I talk a little bit fast, but I will do my best. If like I said, feel free to interrupt me or tell me to shut up if I'm moving too fast. Oops. Okay, so what is positive psychology? I think, like I said, there's a lot of different ideas out there, quite a few misconceptions as well. For me, I think the easiest way to think about what positive psychology is to compare it with what it isn't. And oops, my next arrow isn't working. So to compare it to traditional psychology, or what I call business as usual psychology. Traditional psychology that you may have heard of all over the place is focused on a disease model or on a medical model. So this became really popular in the United States and in Europe, but really all over the world after World War II. And the idea behind the disease model of traditional psychology is to figure out like what is wrong with people and how can we fix it? How can we help them? So humans are typically seen as flawed, as fragile, as casualties of cruel environments or of bad genetics or a combination of the two. So again, we look at what's wrong and we try to fix it. And if you look at sort of the psychological research that's out there, you will see this emphasis on the dark side, the negative side, those things that can go wrong. So if you do, for example, a quick search in Google on psychological research, you'll see that there's a ton of research articles that have been done on anger, anxiety, and depression. So we have over 5,000 articles on anger, over 40,000 in anxiety, and over 54,000 on depression. And of course, these numbers change every day, but a ton of research looking at these things that can go wrong. And then on the flip side, there's much less research looking on those things that can go right with humans, that can go right with the human condition. So only about 400 articles on joy, 1,700 on happiness, about 2,500 on life satisfaction. So this is still a lot of research, but compared to how much there is on this other side of the spectrum, really not that much on what can go right with people. And I'm not saying this is necessarily bad. I don't think it's bad or good. There's definitely been gains. I think, you know, focusing on the negative, focusing on what can go wrong, has helped us make really great strides in understanding and treating psychological disorders. So compared to a few decades ago, we now have effective treatment, both psychological, so therapy, and pharmacological medicines that can treat, you know, more than a dozen disorders that in the past were not treatable. On the other side, on the other hand, though, the cost of focusing on the negative is that we've sort of not learned as much, not focused as much on what can go right with people. And that's really what positive psychology is focused on. So it's like the flip side of the coin. So I have here a few quotes that I wanted to share with you, but really positive psychology doesn't say ignore all those negative things, but to also draw attention to strengths. So call for as much focus on strengths as on weaknesses, as much interest in building the best things in life as in repairing the worst, and as much attention to fulfilling the lives of healthy people as healing the wounds of the distressed. So the concern with human problems shouldn't be abandoned, but psychology in the past has been incomplete. So one way that I like to think about it is traditional psychology, business as usual psychology, is concerned with how to get somebody who's struggling, so maybe like a negative 10, how do we get that person to like a -5, or how do we get somebody who's at a -5 to a 0? And positive psychology is concerned more with how do we get somebody who might be, you know, doing okay, but not flourishing, not living their best life. How do we get them from like a 0 to an 8, or from an 8 to a 10? So again, just looking at that flip side of the coin. Oh gosh, these arrows not working is a little bit difficult. So I want you guys to do a quick exercise. I have a couple of exercises throughout the presentation, and hopefully, I'm watching some of you. I know a lot of screens I can't see, but hopefully you guys will try this with me. Can you raise one of your hands as high as you can? All right, thank you for some of you for taking part in this. Okay, so raise it as high as you can, and now raise it even higher. All right, so that, my friends, is positive psychology. You can put your hands down now. It's a little bit hard to do it virtually since you can't see each other. But when you do this exercise in a large lecture hall, it's amazing because I say, raise your hand as high as you can. And everybody does it. And then I say, raise it higher. And yet you see everyone sort of stretch up and get their arms even higher. And this is really what positive psychology is about. It's sort of how do you push yourself to be a better version of yourself, to live the best life that you can possibly live. So I think of positive psychology as having two broad benefits. So first, like we did in this brief exercise, it's this idea of finding your best self, doing things to kind of live the best version of yourself, creating your best version of your life for what we call a flourishing life. And actually, I want to share a personal picture with you guys, just because I came across this recently. So my husband, which I know some of you guys already know, but he was a professional football player for many years. And this is a picture from his high school locker. So he's number 88 right here. And it says, "Did you get better today?" And I just love this because it's so in line with a lot of my own research and teaching. So again, this idea of positive psychology, of like sort of working on becoming the best version of yourself. And it is work, as we'll see. It's a lot of work. Now, the second sort of benefit of positive psychology is really to sort of build resilience. So, you know, life is sort of a roller coaster. There's really good times, really great times, and then there's some really difficult times that most of us won't be able to escape. You know, life is just kind of ups and downs, and sometimes epidemics happen and things get really difficult and stressful. So positive psychology is also about building strengths, building resilience. I think about it almost like prevention or prophylaxis, so that we become more resilient for when things get really difficult, because they will. No matter how much we try to ignore or run away from difficult times, they will happen. So again, this idea of becoming your best self, creating your best life, but also building resilience for when things do get difficult. So one of the sort of misconceptions about positive psychology is that it is happyology, that it's the science of happiness. And I just want to address that right off the bat. Happiness is a big part of positive psychology. We have a ton of research on happiness, but it isn't everything. So one of my pet peeves when you see positive psychology in the popular media, you see this gigantic smiley face. It seems like whoever is in charge of layout can't help themselves from using this smiley face. And I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of history on the smiley face, because I think it's so interesting. But this is Harvey Bell right here. And he was a graphic designer in the 60s. He created the smiley face. So before the 60s, before this guy came along, we didn't have the smiley face. He was actually creating an ad for a life insurance company, and he got paid $45 to create this image. And he didn't copyright it, and neither did the life insurance company. So here we go. Now we have smiley faces all over the place and emojis and these big yellow things that we can't seem to get away from. But I do want to just, again, point out that although happiness is important, that's not what I mean when I'm talking about a life of flourishing or well-being or life satisfaction. So I think one of the most popular and best research theories in positive psychology is this PERMA theory of well-being. It comes from the University of Pennsylvania, a guy named Marty Seligman, who was actually one of my advisors when I did one of those too many masters that I worked on. But for him, PERMA, or well-being, stands for positive emotions. So happiness does play a role in well-being and life satisfaction, but so do all these other things. So engagement matters. Engagement is this idea of, having things at work or maybe outside of work, hobbies that you are engaged with, that you care about, that you're passionate about doing. If you've heard of the term flow, it's things that you just like to engage with and get involved with. Relationships, I think, if there's one of these that's more important than the other, I would say relationships. The most important thing that I think we learned in the past few decades of research in positive psychology is that relationships are the key to a life of flourishing or to a life well lived. And I can talk about that for 6 months in itself. Meaning is really important. So having meaning in your life, finding that you have a purpose, like you're here for a purpose, you're contributing to the world or to other people or to your organizations in a way that matters. That's really important. And so is accomplishment. So, feeling like you're making progress, whether it's at home or in your relationships or at work, also plays a big role into well-being. So again, happiness is a part of it, but when I'm talking about positive psychology, I'm talking about a lot more than like having a big smile plastered on your face. And here I have just a rough list that I threw together of just different areas of research that fall under this broad umbrella of positive psychology. And you'll see that there's a lot of different things on here. So, things like positive emotions for sure, but also resilience and human potential, creativity, teamwork, altruism, character strengths, all sorts of different things fall under this broad umbrella. So that was sort of really broadly what this field of positive psychology is. I want to switch gears a little bit now and sort of let you guys know that it is very much an applied field. So the point of positive psychology isn't just to learn about all these things, but to figure out ways that we can sort of support people in building these things. And the really great news after a few decades of empirical research is that you can build these things. You can sort of build well-being. You can build life satisfaction. So this is a pie of positive psychology that we like to throw out there a lot, but based on now thousands of research articles, we have determined that well-being depends about 50% on your genetics, on your genes. So a lot of people, don't think that they could be more satisfied with their life, don't think that they can build higher well-being because they're just naturally, not the most optimistic. They're naturally not the most outgoing, or they're naturally just not very happy. But it turns out that genetics only affects about 50% of your well-being. Circumstances, this is where we focus most of our attention, most of us, right? So by circumstances, I mean life circumstances. So how much money do we have? What type of car do we have? How big is our house? What is our job title? This is where people, like if you ask people, what are their goals in life? What are their motivations? This is what people focus on the most, because they think that once they achieve these things, then they'll be well off. Then they'll be happy with their life. Then they'll, be able to kind of go relax because they've done it, and things will get better. But it turns out these things don't make nearly as big of a difference as we think they do. And there's all sorts of studies on this. One of the most classic studies actually goes all the way back to the 70s. And they looked at, this group of researchers looked at people who won the lottery. So they won large sums of money in lottery, or people who became paraplegic based either on disease or some sort of accident. And what they found is that a year later, people basically returned to their baseline well-being, baseline life satisfaction. So, it seems like if you win the lottery and all of a sudden you're a millionaire and you can buy everything you want and take all the trips you want, and your life will just be amazing. And then, it seems like if you lose the ability to use your limbs and to walk, your life will be over. But it turns out that both these groups are about the same a year later. But what we can do, and what is like in my control and your control, we can take these deliberate actions. We can make changes in our own life that contribute to our well-being, that contribute to our life satisfaction. And this is really where positive psychology comes into play. It teaches us about, scientifically, like what are some of the things I can do to improve my well-being, to improve my life satisfaction, and sort of be the best version of me. So like I said, I was going to do just a mini lesson on brain plasticity. And I think this is some of the most exciting research in psychology in the past few decades. So you guys have to realize psychology is still a pretty new field. Things move really fast. In the past couple decades, we have a lot of really new technology, the PET scans, fMRI machines, things like that, that we can actually sort of track behavior and changes on a very sort of like brain level. Neuroplasticity, neuro means brain, and plasticity, it comes from the word, it is similar to the word plastic, and it's this idea of change. The idea is that our brains can change. And this is like so fascinating and exciting. Even about 2 decades ago, as a field, we thought that, after childhood or maybe adolescence at the latest, that this wasn't possible. Brain change wasn't possible. Improvement wasn't possible. If we saw any sort of change, we sort of thought that it would be negative. Somebody who had a stroke and saw some degeneration of the brain, or maybe somebody who was getting up there in years, getting older and seeing deterioration. But what we're learning now is that the brain can change at any time throughout our lives, and we have a lot of control over that. And one of the classic studies that I love looking at this idea of neuroplasticity looks at cabbie drivers in London, and that's why I have this picture over here. So I don't know how many of you have been to London, but it's a really big city. It's huge and really complicated. It wasn't like pre-designed. It's sort of a city that has grown organically, so it's just the spiderweb maze of messiness. And what researchers have done is they have looked at the brains of professional cabbie drivers in London. So it used to be that cabbie drivers in London weren't allowed to use GPS systems. And you had to, in order to get your license, you had to go to a professional school for cabbie drivers. It was a 3-year program. You went to school for about 6 hours a day, and you had to memorize something to the extent of 25,000 different street names. So you had to remember these names and be able to fill them in on a blank map. So it was amazing how much these cabbie drivers learned. And looking at their brain scans, what we see is that there's this part of their brain called the hippocampus. It's pretty far in there, but the hippocampus has a lot is related to learning, spatial memory. It also has a lot to do with emotional processing. We'll talk about that later. But what we see in these London cab drivers is that the hippocampus is actually larger compared to people who aren't cabbie drivers, what we call control participants. And what we see is that as people have done this for longer, so somebody who has been a cab driver in London for 20 years, as opposed to 10 years or as opposed to 5 years, has an even larger hippocampus. So again, they're using this part of their brains so much because they have such a difficult job that requires them to use so much spatial reasoning that this part of the brain actually grows from use. And that's sort of the point I want to make here is that, you know, there is no neuroplasticity drug. It's not like we can take something and you know, grow our brains or change our brains. Really what causes neuroplasticity, what causes our brains to change and grow and develop is a lot of practice. So it takes a lot of work, repetitive practice, and also pushing ourselves to engage in things that are difficult. So things that, you know, make us uncomfortable or that we don't understand yet. Like working at things that are difficult really kind of speeds up this whole process. The more difficult something is for us, the more of an effect it'll have on our brain. So related to neuroplasticity is this idea of neurogenesis. So this is an even newer area of research in psychology. And neurogenesis has to do with the idea that we can grow brain cells. So you can, hi Mona, I just saw Mona. Oh, it's so good to see you. I love you. Sorry, awkward. Neurogenesis, is this idea that we can grow new brain cells. Again, mostly in this hippocampus. I have here a part of the brain called that we've been talking about called the hippocampus. But basically what we know now is that we grow about 700 new brain cells a day. Now there are billions and billions of brain cells or neurons in our brain. So 700 a day doesn't seem like all that much. But if you look at an individual from like the age of 0 when they're born to the age of 50 with about 700 or 600 new brain cells a day, that means that in 50 years, we've completely like changed our brain cells from the ones that we were born with. So this is really kind of tremendous. So again, we're creating new cells, like change is happening, and it's happening all across the lifespan. Now it does slow down with age, so that's not, you know, we haven't completely lied to you guys. Like aging definitely slows down this process of neurogenesis, but we do actually have a lot of control over it. And this again is super exciting news. But there's certain things that you can do to kind of create new brain cells, and there's things that you shouldn't do to if you don't want to kill off your brain cells, there's some things you shouldn't do. So like I said before, when we were talking about neuroplasticity, learning, continuing to learn across the lifespan, pushing yourself, practicing, doing difficult things in a learning environment is really conducive to neurogenesis. Running or other sorts of cardio exercise are really important for neurogenesis. Your diet makes a really big difference too. So these are really tough for me, but calorie restriction. So, you know, not eating as much as you do, getting up from the table before you're full, or intermittent fasting. These all have really big implications for neurogenesis. The types of food we eat is really important. So foods that are high in flavonoids, so for example, blueberries seem to help. This I think is really interesting, but crunchy food. So eating food that's crunchy or difficult to digest actually makes a difference, as opposed to, you'll see on the other side here, I have mushy food. So eating that steak can actually be beneficial in terms of neurogenesis. Omega-3s, as you know, this is found in a lot of seafood and other food. Sex is also good for neurogenesis, so also engage in more sex. Some of the bad stuff is stress. So stress kind of slows down this process. Sleep deprivation, like I said, age. So the process does slow down with age. Drugs and alcohol, also not good for neurogenesis. Although I will say that if you are a wine drinker, I encourage you to drink red wine. Red wine is sort of, has a neutral impact on neurogenesis because of the resveratrol in it. And like I said, mushy food is not so good. But again, the reason I'm putting all this stuff out here about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity is just because I think it's so sort of powerful and empowering to realize that, you know, brain change is possible. Growing new brain cells is possible, and that you and we have so much control over these processes ourselves. And again, you know, hot off the press in the past couple of decades of research, and really empowering. So one of the things that, like I said at the beginning, when I was sort of talking about, you know, the outline for today, is this, you know, positive psychology really builds on this idea that we are in control of our own well-being. We are in control of our life satisfaction. And there are things that we can do to make those changes, to make those improvements. So we have developed as a field a lot of what we call positive psychology practices or positive psychology interventions. And I want to, there's a lot of them out there, but I wanted to introduce you guys to one today. Like I said, it's a really short one, but it's very mighty. And after we sort of engage in it, I will talk a little bit about the science of how this can benefit us. So hopefully you can all take out a piece of paper and join me on this very quick exercise. So it's called the 3 good things, or the 3 blessings exercise. It is a gratitude building exercise. You may have heard of it. It's becoming really popular. But there's 3 quick steps to it. So you need to take about 3 to 5 minutes to think about 3 good things that have happened in your life in the past 24 hours. So that's what this first step is. And it could be something really big. It could be something like, my child just took his or her first step. Or it could be something really small, like, I happen to have a chocolate croissant for breakfast today, and it was delicious. So think about these 3 good things that happened over the past 24 hours, write them down. And there's a lot of research showing why writing it down is really important. And then in number 3, this is the most important step. It's sort of reflecting on the why. Like, why did you choose to write these 3 things? What was good about them? So for me, for example, I had this chocolate croissant this morning, which I love. And it was really like a great thing for me because 1, I love chocolate croissants. They always make me happy. And 2, I got to enjoy it with my 7-year-old, who also really loves chocolate croissants. And it was this cute little thing we got to do before I dropped him off at camp today, which, by the way, is another really good thing because I've had them home for 3 months now. So I'm going to just kind of do it with you guys, but why don't we take 2-3 minutes to do a really quick exercise in this? right, I'm gonna come back. Usually I would like to dedicate a little bit more time to that, but I still have a lot to go. I could have also been here for a really long time today because it's a really good day for me. I know I've said this so far, but it's just so fun to be here and to see people like Mona. She's really big on my screen right now, and Nick and Christina, and I just love getting to talk about this stuff because it's what it gets me really excited, and then seeing old friends, and such a good day. Anyhow, I want to move on and kind of talk you guys through a little bit of the research that has looked at this really brief intervention that we just did called the 3 good things or the 3 blessings intervention. And I just want to, before I go on, I want to say that, you know, a lot of these things may feel a little bit silly or awkward or kind of superficial at first. And I know when I first started doing this research, when I first started teaching it and actually practicing these things, they felt that way a little bit for me. I'm originally from Romania. And if any of you know people from Eastern Europe, we tend to be pretty pessimistic and sad and mournful all the time. So this felt a little bit strange and uncomfortable. But, you know, in the years that since then, I've just done so much of this research myself, and I've applied it in different settings, and it really is powerful without a lot of effort. So it's really cool, and hopefully I can convince you of that today. But this 3 good things exercise specifically is something that I do with my own kids every night. So I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. It's something I do with my husband every night. I do it at the beginning of every single class that I teach, whether I'm teaching positive psychology or statistics and research methods. I do it with staff and faculty or with my clients. And it really is effective if you can do it at least 3 to 5 times a week and be consistent with it, make it a habit. So I wanted to share some of the empirical or research-based results on this little exercise of building gratitude. So first, we know that gratitude is one of the top 3 predictors of life satisfaction. So if you want to increase life satisfaction, the 3 blessings exercise, this gratitude building exercise is very effective. And we also know that about 18.5%, so almost 20% of differences in people's life satisfaction can be predicted by the level of gratitude that they feel. So if I measure your gratitude, I'm pretty good at predicting, like being able to tell how satisfied you are with your life. And we know that doing this 3 blessings exercise for about 3 to 4 weeks, if you do it 3 to 5 times a week, again, just a couple minutes, those 3 to 5 times a week, it can increase happiness by about 25%. So those are just some really broad results, but I want to kind of give you guys some more specific studies, again, looking at this exercise that you all just engaged in. So one study had participants do the 3 blessings exercise, and after doing the exercise for a couple of weeks, they were given a flu vaccine. So we had a group of participants that did the exercise and a group of participants that didn't get the exercise, then everybody got the flu vaccine, and 5 days later, we went back and measured the amount of antibodies that they had to be able to fight off flu. And what we find is that people who did the gratitude exercise, who did this 3 blessings exercise, actually had higher levels of antibodies to fight off the flu as a result of this gratitude exercise. There's been a lot of research looking at mental acuity. So here again, we divide people randomly into, do they do the 3 blessings exercise or they don't do it? And we find that doing the 3 blessings exercise increases what we call mental acuity. So this is a combination of, you know, ability to solve difficult problems, ability to kind of detect difficult numerical patterns. So it's basically like, how good is our brain working? How able are we to problem solve? And again, this simple 3 blessings exercise for 3 to 4 weeks increases performance on these mental acuity tests. And really related to that, it increases performance on creativity tests. So a simple creativity test might be something like, I show you a picture of a brick, or I show you a pen or a fork, and I ask you in a certain amount of time to come up with as many uses for this item. And what we see is that people who did this gratitude exercise are able to come up with more, like a bigger and more diverse list of uses for something like a pen, a fork, or a brick. Some really cool studies looking at actual blood chemistry. So there was one recent study where they took people who had heart failure. So these are people that are pretty seriously ill. And you can sort of test heart function by looking at blood chemistry. And what we see is that in patients who did the 3 blessings exercise, not only did they not show the same deterioration as other heart failure patients, but they showed improvements in their functioning of their heart when everything else, medication, physical exercise, diet, everything else was held the same, other than this 3 blessings exercise that was enough to boost sort of blood chemistry and heart functioning. And then a really cool, even newer study looks at telomeres. So if you haven't heard of telomeres, they're sort of like the caps at the end of our DNA. They protect our DNA. It's sort of like these tails. And what we see is that as people get older, these tails, these telomere caps get shorter and shorter. And it used to be thought that, you know, once they're short, there's nothing we can do. We're just getting old and ugly and wrinkly, and it is what it is. But we see that doing this gratitude exercise, doing this 3 blessings exercise, not only prevents shrinkage, but actually leads telomeres to sort of extend back out. So like, whoa, tremendous findings, both on like behavioral levels, emotional levels, and on our actual our actual genetics and body chemistry. So that was just one exercise. If you like that exercise, I suggest here writing a gratitude letter. This is a way to sort of kick it up a notch. So instead of just reflecting on things that you're grateful for, reflect on why you're grateful for the people in your life. So like I said, you know, in one of my early slides, one of the findings from positive psychology is that like other people really, really matter. And our life really is a life that's well lived when we sort of foster and build these relationships and turn outwards towards other people. So my favorite exercise is, you know, writing this gratitude letter to somebody that has made an impact in their life, in your life. And it doesn't have to be well written. It doesn't have to be super long. It could just be a page where you very clearly state, this is what this person did for me, and this is why it was important for me. If you want to kick it up even more, what I have my students do is actually deliver this letter in person, or at least over the phone, or over the internet. So actually read it to that person. And it's sort of an uncomfortable experience, but it's tremendously emotional and powerful. And it's good for you, and it's also tremendously good for the other person. I just wanted to, this is another cool study that recently was done where, again, it places this emphasis on how when we do good things for other people, it actually has a bigger effect on our well-being, on our life satisfaction than when we do stuff for ourselves. So I know this slide is very vague because this is like hot off the press data, but what you're looking at here on the y-axis is basically expression for pro-inflammatory genes. So higher numbers here means that there's more sort of like pro-inflammatory activity happening in the body. And as we all know by now, inflammation is terrible for us. It leads to all sorts of chronic diseases. And lower numbers here means less activation of these pro-inflammatory genes. So lower numbers are better than higher numbers. And what they did here is they separated people into 4 different conditions. So there's a control condition where these people just kind of got to live their life as normal, and we track them before and after a certain amount of time. There's people that did good for the world. So this is something like maybe you decided to engage in a practice of going to clean up the beach or picking up trash or something like that. Then we had people engage in what is labeled here as other activities. So this is people that were writing these gratitude letters that I was telling you about, or people that focused on the self over here. So this is sort of like you took a month to do all sorts of good things for yourself. So it might be, you know, like going to parties, not anymore, but like, you know, treating yourself, getting a massage, you know, doing those like self-indulgent things. And really like the big takeaway from here is what we see is that the biggest change, the biggest difference that we observe in this month is that people that were writing those gratitude letters, people that were doing something for other people outside of themselves, that's where we saw the biggest decrease in these pro-inflammation genetic expressions. So again, like, we're seeing these changes on a fundamental biological level, which I think is just like, whoa, so fascinating. I know I'm hurrying through a lot of things, but one of the things that you might be thinking at this point is like, okay, but you know, is this really just like an American thing? Does this work in other cultures? You might even be thinking like, this sounds a little bit hippy dippy, like you're in California. What about the rest of the world? You're right in the sense that most of this research has so far been done in the United States, but there is new research, including my own, that is looking at cultures all over the world, and we are finding really similar patterns. So this graph right here happens to be from an engineering plant in Japan, in Tokyo. And sorry, the colors disappeared here, but basically these are people that engaged in the 3 good things, or the 3 blessings exercise, for different amounts of time. So over 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, and 40 days. So what we see here, the top line is the experimental group. And what we were measuring is how much activity, how much bodily rhythm were these individuals showing when they got to work in the morning? So, you know, I know there's a lot of us out there where we get to work in the morning and we're like, oh, we're back. Why do we have to be back here? And we just kind of move sort of slow, and it's hard to get back into the groove. Or, you know, you can come to work and you're excited about what you're doing, and you're sort of like more energetic and your body's on fire, and you're more engaged with your work. And that's what this is showing. So again, a group of people just went about their lives as normal. This group on top got to engage in this 3 blessings exercise. And we see that as time went on, they showed more and more increase in their body rhythms as they got to work in the morning. So it was like they were more excited to be there. They were more pumped and energetic to start their work day. So it does work in other types of cultures as well. So I'm going to shift gears right now and talk about how positive psychology works in applied settings. But before I move on, we've only sort of touched base on 2 interventions so far, this 3 blessings intervention and the gratitude letter intervention. And I just want to, you know, note that there's a lot of different interventions out there, and some of them work better for different people. Some of them work better at different times in your life and in different situations. And it's sort of about building a toolbox that you can use at different times, and you have to sort of experiment with these and see what works for you better, what doesn't work for you, and so forth. But there's a lot of different interventions out there. I just gave you guys 2 little examples. So this is the East West Center. And like I mentioned before, one of the things I love about the center is that in addition to all the academic research and work, there is such an applied emphasis. So I really wanted to kind of shift gears and talk about how do we scale this stuff up? Like, yeah, it's great to, you know, improve gratitude and life satisfaction in my own life, but how do we do this on a bigger scale? And I wanted to start talking about how we do this in schools. This is sort of what I know most about. This happens to be a picture from my son's elementary school, and the teachers and staff are doing something weird and wacky. So I thought that was funny. The kids are doing it here too. But so how would this work? We're going to stick with sort of this idea of gratitude, but how would this work in a school setting? So this is a study from about 10 years ago where they actually implemented this gratitude 3 blessings activity that we just did in a group of 7th and 8th graders at a school. So this group of researchers took 11 classes and 221 students, and they randomly assigned them to these 3 conditions. So you were in a condition where 5 times a week you had to write about things that went wrong that day, like things that annoyed you. They called this the hassles condition. And actually, if you look at most people's journals, this is really what they focus on. A lot of journal writing is about complaining about what went wrong with your day. So some of the students, a third of the students were put into this hassles condition. A third of these students were randomly put into this 3 blessings condition. So this is what you guys just did. And then a third of the students were asked to just write about neutral things each day. So something like describe your bedroom, describe your living room, just these neutral things. And then at the end of the month, the researchers went back and looked at, what happened to student gratitude, optimism, and life satisfaction. And what they found is that these students and these students didn't show any change. But students that were in this group that had randomly just been assigned to this gratitude condition, these 3 blessings condition, saw improvements in gratitude, saw improvement in optimism, and saw improvement in life satisfaction. Now, I've mentioned this a couple times. Some of us are parents. I know Mona's a parent. And, you might just be thinking like, okay, that's great. I want my kid to be more optimistic and to be happier. But what I really care about is academics. Like all this other stuff is fluffy. And what we do know is that, this stuff, engaging in these types of practices doesn't pull away from academics. It actually, they work together, they work synergistically, where if schools and teachers place more emphasis on positive education, it actually leads to better academic outcomes. So a really large study came out recently. It's called a meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is basically a study that looks at many other studies and sort of combines them together into one analysis. So this was a study, a meta-analysis conducted in the US, and it was looking at 200 different studies with over 270 students, and looking at the effects of positive education, positive psychology on academic outcomes. And what they found is that when you compare students who receive education in positive psychology to students who don't receive education in positive psychology, we see about an 11% difference in academic achievement. And schools who have sort of included positive psychology into their curriculums, on average, schools there do about 6 months ahead on national standardized tests of literacy and numeracy. So again, the big takeaway here is that doing positive psychology, including that into our education systems, not only increases well-being among students, increases optimism and life satisfaction, and decreases depression, decreases anxiety, but it also has huge implications on academic outcomes. And again, we see this all over the world. So it's not just an American phenomenon. This is data coming from Bhutan, the small country of Bhutan. And what you see here, the blue line represents, they basically had 11 schools where they incorporated positive psychology into the kids' education, and 7 schools where they didn't. So it's just business as usual, regular education. And what we see is that this program lasted 15 months. And what we are measuring here is well-being. And what you see is that over the 15 months of this intervention, well-being went up significantly for the group of students who were getting this positive psychology education. For any of you guys that are social scientists or scientists, I have here the effect size of 0.59. This is tremendously large effect size. It is about the equivalent of like a 1-year boost in sort of level, like academic level. What's really cool too is that at 15 months, they stopped the intervention. So they went back to their previous curriculum. They didn't do the positive psychology anymore. And what you see is that this boost in well-being for the most part remained. So we all know, like we've all gone through school. We know what it's like to have to study for history or math, and we cram these things for the exam, and then we forget it later, maybe a year later or a week later or 10 minutes after the exam. This this doesn't seem to happen for well-being. So you're teaching kids these skills of well-being, these skills of resilience, and they seem to stick around even after the intervention stops. You don't see that significant increase in well-being for students that didn't get the intervention. This is from the same data, the same schools. Again, for those parents interested in academics, we see that we have a similar boost in academics with the positive psychology intervention. So again, teaching positive psychology, doing these positive psychology interventions not only improves well-being for students, but it has a significant boost on how they do academically. This was, again, in terms of standardized school tests that measure things like verbal math skills, history skills, and so forth. So again, schools that don't get this intervention, the traditional curriculum, we don't see that boost, but we see it for the positive psychology intervention. And again, it remains in the year after the intervention stops. And by the way, we don't know what happens after 27 months. The data just stops here. They've done this in countries like Mexico and Peru as well. And I just put this out here because every time we are doing this research, it gets more ambitious. So in Bhutan, we had about 20 schools, in Mexico, about 70, and then in Peru, about 700. And we see these same patterns wherever we go across the world. Boosts in well-being, as well as boosts in standardized test scores. Again, I know this is like just a tasting menu and I'm kind of zapping through all this stuff, but I wanted to also give you guys some examples from positive organizations or positive leadership, because I know we all have different interests. So research in positive organizations and in positive leadership resides more in the business world and in business schools, as opposed to psychology departments. So they use slightly different research methods. For anybody who's been to business school, you know that it's more like of a case study model. So I wanted to present you guys with two case studies today about how positive psychology is implemented in an organizational context with tremendous results. The first example comes from Griffin Hospital. This is a hospital in Derby, Connecticut. It's the only hospital in that town. And one of the senior leaders, one of the senior managers at Griffin was this guy named Patrick Charmel. And he was really gung-ho on positive psychology. He, was really optimistic and positive and was trying to kind of do this stuff at the hospital, but was getting a lot of backlash from the CEO and the president. And eventually they actually fired him. And the employees of the hospital were really, really upset about this. And they actually ended up storming the board of directors meeting and demanding that Patrick Charmel get hired back. And finally, the board gave in. Patrick Charmel ended up getting his job back and actually also got the job of CEO and president. So the other two guys got fired and he took over this hospital. And really his goal was to implement positive psychology interventions into the hospital. What he found when he took over the job was that the hospital was in really bad situation. So it was millions of dollars in deficit. And basically what he learned is that if things didn't turn around really quickly, within 6 months, he would have to make major changes and downsize. So he would actually have to fire a lot of the employees that fought to give him his job. So he had about 6 months to turn things around. And he did it with a lot of these positive psychology interventions, including passing out journals to all of the employees and making them do this 3 blessings exercise 3 times a week. He was able to turn things around. So the hospital has been named one of the 100 best companies to work for in the United States for 10 consecutive years. No other hospital has achieved that. They've won all these other awards, and what's really cool about them is that they've been able to increase their finances, but also the quality of their services that they're offering. So it is one of the top 5% of distinguished hospitals in the country for clinical excellence. hormones. So basically, if you get sick and you end up at this hospital, your chances are much better. You have lower risk of complications, higher risk of living, and so forth. So, you know, he credits positive psychology interventions for being able to kind of create this quick turnaround and change the entire culture of the hospital with financial outcomes and outcomes in terms of the service that they're offering. And I know at this point you're thinking like, okay, but this is a hospital. What about, you know, places that, you know, might not care about so much about this, like, you know, ooey gooey positivity stuff? What about places like financial institutions that just care about making the money, like making the dough? Does this work in these types of institutions? And it does. The second case study and the last case study that I wanted to provide you guys today was from Prudential. So Prudential is a large American financial institution. And I wanted to focus first on their retirement business. So a few years ago, Prudential Retirement was doing really poorly. And this is an important part of their business. In the United States, like in many parts of the world, there's more and more people getting old, and you know, a lot of Prudential's financials come from this older population, but they were losing clients, they were losing money, things were going terribly wrong. So one of the things that they decided to do is to unite with Cigna. So this is another big company. It's also kind of their, you know, arch enemy in the world of retirement. And it's sort of like the Yankees and the Red Sox getting together. That's how one of the top managers described it. So they combined together, but things were just, you know, bad. There was clashes between the Cigna people and the Prudential people. There was low morale. There was cynicism. People weren't happy to be there. They weren't happy to work there. The company was in the red. And this is a quote from the CEO at the time, John Kim, and he says, implementing positive psychology practices was initially seen as just being positive, smiles. It became clear, however, that this was a significant change. There is no end, no final grade. This is about changing our culture, our strategy, our approach. It's not a destination or a conclusion, but a process. I will know that we have succeeded when customers and employees see us as above average in all the technical aspects of our business. So what's really interesting about Prudential is that they decided to sort of implement this program in positive psychology, but people were sort of reluctant to do it, including the CEO at the time. They saw it as sort of like this smiley, superficial thing, like this isn't really going to make a difference, but it did. So they managed to successfully merge these two companies. Within a year, they went from substantial losses to tremendous profitability, so about 20% annual growth, when in an industry where annual growth of about 4 to 5% is typical. They were able to keep 95% of their clients. Employees became happier, so opinion surveys measuring like how much people enjoyed working here went substantially up. And also it became the largest business for Prudential and went from something about 160 million to like 1 billion. Eventually the CEO changed, and this was a really big test for the company. Would these changes sort of go away as a new CEO came in, or would they remain? And what they've seen is that they have remained. So what we know is that this has become a culture. The culture has become more positive. This is sort of case study 2B because it's also Prudential, but just adding a little bit more. One of the executives at Prudential Retirement ended up being moved over to Prudential Real Estate, again, a division of Prudential that was really not doing well. So Jim Malaki moved over to Prudential Real Estate. In the past year, Prudential Real Estate had lost $140 million. When he took over, they were already 70 million in the red. Again, there was high employee turnover, morale was really low, things were looking really pretty terrible. And Jim Malachi coming over from Prudential Retirement, again, his big goal was like, okay, we're gonna turn this around, we have to do it fast, and the way I'm gonna do it is by implementing positive psychology. So this is what he wrote. He says, when I took over in the fall of 2009, we were facing 70 million in loss per year. The company had lost 140 million the year before. I hearkened back to my Prudential retirement days and what I learned about positive psychology and positive organizational scholarship. The message was, let's look at what we have as opposed to what we don't have. Let's look at what we can do as opposed to what we don't do. How do we start to take the limits off of our company? Not in terms of just going back to where we were 2 or 5 years ago, but how do we achieve something that is truly great and never seen before in our industry? We implemented a variety of positive practices and tools, and the results were astounding. And again, one of the things that Jim did is pass out a journal and make all employees take part in this 3 blessings exercise. Tremendous results. So in 80 days, so he was like, let's get this going right away. In his first 80 days at his new role, 93% of employees at Prudential Real Estate received positive psychology training. Over the first 12 months, employee opinion scores rose in 9 of 10 categories. He went from a $70 million loss to $20 million in profit. He achieved twice of what he was kind of hoping for with his business plan. Turnover declined. They won an award for service, and it just goes on. And I know I'm running out of time, but the reason I wanted to sort of include these examples in here is to see that, again, positive psychology interventions don't just increase like the smiliness and happiness and like, yay, of people, but they have real practical, measurable outcomes, both in school settings and in organizational settings. Now, I'm getting to the very last bit of my presentation. I know that I should have had like 3 breaks so far because there's all sorts of research on how long you should be talking, and I've been talking for too long. But the last thing I sort of wanted us to think about as a group is like, yeah, this all sounds great, but is this really just a luxury? I mean, I've been talking about schools, I've been talking about these big businesses, but is this something that we can implement on an even broader level to maybe people who aren't in, you know, this advantaged position? I mean, I'm a white woman, I'm highly educated, like I'm blabbing to you guys about the stuff from a certain position. Can we use this even more broadly to really help people? So the last sort of topic that I want to talk about is positive communities. Now, you know, initially I had a few examples for you guys about how positive psychology has been implemented in different communities around the world, in places like in a town in Australia and so forth. And they were great. It's sort of like, you know, they implemented positive psychology in schools and in fire departments and police departments, and tremendous results. But then I was like, okay, but, you know, again, is it a luxury in places that have money, that have resources? So some of the sort of most recent work and some of the coolest work, I think, comes from work looking at implementing positive psychology in places like prisons or severely disadvantaged schools, or even in refugee communities. So this is actually a picture from where I spent most of my childhood. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. This is a refugee camp in Austria. And my parents and I escaped communist Romania when I was young, and I spent about 3 years here. So, you know, kind of thinking about, can we use these practices, these tools of positive psychology to kind of make life better for people here? That's really kind of powerful and moving to me. And just a little bit of background, you guys probably know more about this than I do. This is the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. It holds about 75,000 Syrian refugees. I think it is the largest refugee camp in the world right now. But just to, you know, I think this is a real massive humanitarian crisis that we're facing right now, where, you know, millions and millions of people around the world have been displaced and are living in these types of camps, afraid for their lives, you know, without enough food, without safety, without running water, under constant stress. Is there something that we could do with these tools of positive psychology to help these people? And there's actually some really amazing work that is coming out from this guy, Professor Amit Bernstein. He is a professor of psychology at Hafia University in Israel. And he's actually doing research in these camps, looking to see if we can implement these tools of positive psychology to help these people. And one of the reasons he wanted to do this is because it is a tremendously traumatic, tremendously stressful situation. And these people do not have access to clinicians or psychologists or psychiatrists to help them. And what's really cool about these positive psychology practices is that they are very low cost. We know that they are effective from a couple decades of empirical research now. And also they can be administered on really large scales, as we've seen with schools and organizations, without needing like real professionals. So we can train paraprofessionals. I can do a training with you over a week or two and train you how to kind of go ahead and train further people. And what he has seen in these early studies is that it's definitely not a panacea. This obviously doesn't solve everything, but we do see tremendous reduction, about 50% reduction in stress and trauma-related symptoms in these refugees who have gone through positive psychology training. So just this idea that we can use these small, free interventions with some of the most vulnerable populations in the world is just tremendously amazing and powerful for me. And this was a quote that I read in one of these studies where one of these refugees says, "I became a new person. I hope it becomes part of the refugee system. Maybe it's like a luxury for you, but it's medicine for me." And I think this has been so cool for me because as much as I sort of see this change in my students and in my clients, it has always, a little bit felt like, yeah, but it's still some sort of a luxury. I mean, I live in California in Santa Barbara. And just to see that people have now started to implement this in places like refugee camps in Jordan with an effect, and to see, the impact on these actual people is just tremendous. And very hopeful. So I know I blabbed on a lot. That's all I have. I'm going to stop with the smiley face that I'm poo-pooing on and just say thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And I'm sorry I tried to pack on so much, but I know that everyone's got different interests and I wanted to just get a little bit of everything in there. So I'm going to stop my share. And that was that.
Thank you, Saranda. I know that we had advertised this session into 3:15 or 3, let's see now, but those of you who can stay for some questions, then, and Saranda, sorry, I realized I didn't check you on that at the beginning. Those who can stay, I see a few questions now, Saranda, if you want to read in the chat box, and others as well, or you can just unmute yourself in the interest of time if you want to do that while she's checking.
Yeah, if anybody wants to jump in and just ask me as I'm trying to get through these, that would be great as well.
And for those that need to log off, great, wonderful to have had you here, as always. Thanks, Anita.
So one of the questions was about using positive psychology with anxiety and grieving persons. There is quite a bit of research coming out in that. So one of the cool things that, has been changing in the field is sort of, for a while we've had positive psychology and we've had clinical psychology, and now in recent years these two fields are really coming together, and what we see is that some of these positive psychology practices are actually being integrated into traditional sort of clinical therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy and other and sort of improving outcomes for patients as well that are either severely clinically depressed or have clinical anxiety and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Lori and Nathan on our team, if you want to go ahead and post the final message, just in case as people are coming or staying, that they'll have that final message.
Yeah. there's a question about aging, which I think is, I do a lot of research on aging, and the sort of the many years of research on aging has actually shown that people get happier as they get older. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that is one of the, where my research has found that there's tremendous cultural differences on what happens as we age. Americans, though, tend to get a lot happier as they get older and into retirement age.
Mm.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? Like I said, I know I've gone way over. Christina is more than welcome to share my email address if you have any questions that I didn't get to today, or that you're too tired to listen to because I blabbed on for so long. But yeah, anybody can feel free to reach out to me, and I can answer via email, or we can connect and talk and Zoom and whatnot. I'm definitely available. Like I said, I can talk about this stuff for hours every day, and I do that, so.
Great.
Hi, Smaranda. Sorry, I'm just unmuting. I have a question with your slide. In one of the slide about many interventions, there is a point about visualizing your deathbed. So can you just give a
Visualizing what? I'm sorry?
in one of the slide, many types of interventions. So there is a point about visualizing your deathbed.
Yes.
Can you just explain a bit about that part? I mean, why that is there?
Yeah, so this is an exercise that gets a lot of interesting sort of reactions when I first do it, especially with students who are young and don't feel comfortable thinking about their deathbed. But one of the things, so it's really actually, the way it works is that you have people think about, like, okay, it's the end of your life, and you've lived a long life, you've had a full life, you're elderly, and you're now on your deathbed. And I want people to think about, like, okay, who is around you? Where are you? And what do you want to be remembered for? And then to reflect on that and write about it. And one of the realizations that people have is that the things that they want to be remembered for, the way that they visualize their deathbed, isn't about, that big mansion, that big car, and all that money, and the clothes and so forth. It's really about the people in their lives, and how they've touched those people in their lives. So it's helping people realize what really kind of matters in terms of a life well lived, what contributes to life satisfaction and happiness. And it's not those material things. It's not that money and that fame that we all work so hard towards, that it's more about relationships, and doing things that are meaningful to you.
All right. Thanks so much. By the way, we met in Ventura with Lens in 2018.
Say that again. Sorry.
I'm saying that we did meet in Ventura County with Lens in 2018. But so nice to see you, and thank you so much.
Yes. No, I remember you. So it's good. It's good. Thank you for joining today.
I just want to add that when she asked about deathbed, and I teaching at school, I've been teaching yoga. And if you have been practicing yoga, it's just final pose. We always come to Shavasana, corpse pose. And that's a good kind of like a reminder for all of us that at the end, you could not just escape, And it's kind of good reminder for us, how do we live our life and come to that stage. That would be our final transformation. Are we ready? Are we missing anything before we leaving this world? So it's kind of like thing to remind you when you come to practice, and just live in the present and be grateful for what you have.
Mm-hmm. And I'm actually, I'm a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher as well. And for me, yeah, yoga is just mindfulness and meditation. So another super effective techniques, both in school settings, organizational settings, refugee settings. Ton of work recently on mindfulness and meditation, both physically in yoga or other types of techniques. Very cool that you're doing that. Anybody else?
Hey, Smaranda, I'm MCK. I loved your presentation today. It's definitely one of my 3 good things for sure.
Thank you.
My question, I think, is about, so you've gone through an hour of being able to convince all of us, I think, or probably a good majority of us, that it's a good idea for 3 days a week to take time to think about 3 things that we're grateful for. What happens when we don't have as much time and we don't have the depth of experience that you do to think through the different kind of case studies? How do you often try to help people to get started with that, knowing that there can be such awesome benefits, but people might have those hesitations of like, it's a luxury, or maybe it's just not my thing, or I don't have 3 things that I feel like I can be positive about, so why should I even try at all?
Yeah, so really good point. I think one of sort of the most common, or the most common thing that I hear is like, okay, this sounds great and all, but I don't have time to do this. And you know, one of the reasons that I think both when working with students at a school or with clients on a one-on-one basis, it's really important for me to present the empirical research, right? So I come from a research background, I come from this empirical background, and I think just sort of overwhelming people with the research is sort of convincing. I think it's convincing just to be like, hey, listen, we've done this thousands of times, we know it works. The other thing that I didn't get to talk about today, but these activities take very little amount of time, right? Especially like even when I teach mindfulness, I teach a lot of techniques that are sort of integrated into your daily life. You know, it's not about taking those 30 minutes to be mindful and meditate, but how do I, you know, how am I mindful for a minute while I'm washing my dishes or while I'm taking a shower? So, you know, I think there's ways to do this in short snippets of time that we can integrate into our life. And the research that I didn't get to show is that, you know, people that are able to do this in their lives, we look at their productivity at work, for example, or at school before these interventions and after, and we see tremendous growth in productivity, right? So, I mean, just think about it in your own life, right? Like when you get out of bed in the morning and you're just kind of feeling crummy and yucky, you're not getting that much done that day. When you're getting out of bed in the morning and you're feeling better, you're feeling more optimistic, more hopeful, more energized, you're getting more done that day. So I say to my students or to my patients, like, okay, do you want to take 15 minutes to do this and get 10 hours of work done in 7 hours, or do you want to spend 12 hours at work and get 7 hours of work done, kind of thing, right? Like it boosts productivity, and that's one of the biggest findings. And I didn't get to mention that today because I'm trying to do so much. But yeah, and I mean, I was definitely one of those people, like, you know, when I started doing this stuff, I was like lecturing at UCSB, I was lecturing at Westmont, I was doing a PhD and a master's, and I had 2 kids, and like felt like my head was about to explode, and I was like, I don't have time to do this. And it really does just kind of, you know, put everything into balance and make me more productive and effective and more pleasant to be around, which is an added bonus. But a really good question. I think honestly, like we all live in this really crazy like rat race, right? Like we're hamsters on a wheel where we're always trying to do more. And I think a lot of positive psychology is about like, instead of always doing, it's about more of being, you know? And I think if we work more on being, then we actually, again, end up being more productive. Anybody else?
What would you say to someone? It's just kind of like if you try to help them to be more positive, but somehow they would just say something like, but you have to face reality. Like in this situation, I think we should like be realistic. Don't just keep that kind of like positive thought, you know, because being realistic might help us to fix this problem and see the real thing, just kind of like have that like somewhere up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, I think, you know, it's not just about being positive or having like a big smile on our face all the time, right? It is about being realistic, but also hopeful and optimistic, right? Because if all we see is problems and we're sort of pessimistic about it, that leads to inaction, right? Like we're gonna just try to push away problems. We're not gonna like engage with them. As opposed to if you can kind of shift the mindset to not necessarily just be like, oh, everything's great and everything will be fine, but to be hopeful, to be optimistic, to realize that we have some power, maybe not over our current situation. I can't control what's going on with this pandemic, but I can control how I react, how I respond to this pandemic. Then I'm more likely to sort of, you know, be action oriented, take steps to like make things a little bit better for myself, for people around me, for people in my community. You know what I mean? So again, it's not about this like everything's all great and fine all the time, because it's not, right? Like, being in a refugee camp sucks. Like, an international pandemic blows. Like, people get sick, people get divorced, shit happens, sorry. But sort of, how are we more resilient and stronger and more sort of action oriented during these events, as opposed to just falling, potentially falling into depression or anxiety?
Thank you.
I have a question, if you still have a moment.
Yes.
Hi, Smaranda. I'm Paroma. I was APLPG 13, and it was really wonderful to see your presentation and to hear you. This was absolutely a wonderful, positive way for me to start my day.
Good morning.
Thank you. So a question that I had was something that I am trying to design or trying to figure out myself. I work with international students, but not maybe basically postgraduate students, and my portfolio is engaging students while they are here in Australia. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out or trying to understand is how to create a positive preparedness almost for students who are having to go back home in many different extenuating circumstances from a safe space in Australia. So my question to you really is, what are some practical, or if you can give me a practical example of something that we could spread to all of our scholars for them to practice, so they can practice positive psychology in their lives every day as they're going through this change. Like in a big community setting, we're talking about hundreds, 300, 400, 500 students or scholars. What is one thing for somebody with an age range of, I don't know, 35 to 55 to incorporate as a new thing in their lives to maybe create that environment of positivity around them?
Yeah, so really, really great question. So again, kind of hearkening back to the end of my presentation, like, is this a luxury? There's still sort of this, it's hard to see how this applies in more difficult situations. I think one of the things that I've found to be most effective, and we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier when talking about yoga, is mindfulness. So mindfulness is really kind of, one of those practices that's easy to teach on a large scale, easy to incorporate into anyone's life, whatever it is that you do, whatever your age is, that has tremendous benefits and tremendous sort of protective benefits in these types of like difficult transitions where you leave a safe space in Australia and you go back to very difficult situations. Again, I realize, I think a lot of these things, you sort of have to do them, and they have to sort of become habits in order to really see the transformative power. And I think that's why I try to blast you guys with so much empirical research, because there is this hesitation that I had as well, like, this is a luxury, this feels a little bit superficial. These are people dealing with like actual big problems. But going back to looking at the chat, mindfulness is something that works extremely well in all sorts of really difficult populations. So again, in refugee camps, it's been extremely effective. With drug addictions, with people with chronic life-threatening diseases, heart disease, cancer, people that have been physically abused, emotionally abused. I think that's one of the most sort of exciting, and I can do, Christina, I'm more than welcome to do like a pop-up on mindfulness as well at some point. But I think that's a really sort of easy thing to teach and implement on a wide scale, that sort of allows people to step away from sort of what's going on in their life, kind of create this detachment that really helps people deal with hardships like that in a very effective way.
Smaranda,
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and thank you for staying on and answering questions. And as you can see, my technology after last week's Gin Squared, my computer's died and I'm here on my phone typing you guys instead of, but to everybody, we'll do the usual follow-up, not from Gin Squared, but, you know, pop-up or workshop style if you've been with us before, where we follow up with you afterwards. So we can give you the information there and end it that way. So
All right,
thank
well,
you.
Natasha, thank you so much for having me and bearing with me blabbing for so long.
That's great. Clearly lots of interest, and good to see so many folks here, and good to get to learn more about what you do. Definitely something practical we can use too. Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
everybody for
Bye,
joining.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Miranda. This is great. Thanks, Christina and everyone.
Bye, my dear. How are you, Christina?
Hi guys. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay. Mhm.